Welcome everyone. This is the February Policy Speaker Series from NASA's Carbon Research Program. I would like to welcome today's speaker, Walter Vergara. He's a senior fellow and a forest and climate specialist at World Resources Institute, WRI, down in Washington, D.C. Mr. Vergara used to work in the climate change groups of the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. In this latter one, he was the division chief for climate change and sustainability. More recently, he directs the initiative 20 by 20 in WRI. He came here a couple of years ago to present this initiative as it was started. Now this initiative is ongoing in many of the countries in Latin America. This ambitious initiative looks to reduce the carbon footprint of land use and land use change activities throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, and Walter will give more details about it during the talk. The title of the talk is Converting the Land Use Sector in Latin America from a Carbon Source to a Carbon Sink. I think more importantly for us, Walter and his team at WRI, they're looking for feedback from NASA researchers in different data products, data sets, NASA Earth Science Division satellite missions that can help them monitor the different land restoration projects throughout Latin America. So we're going to have a chance for questions at the end of the presentation. So now, without further ado, I leave you with Walter.
Should I use this microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thanks for welcoming me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you guys. NASA is part of what we call the hero community in the Americas. So now we are very, very pleased that you continue to do what you do. As Adil said, I'm going to describe briefly Initiative 2020 in the context of a movement that has grown beyond our initial expectations to restore land in Latin America. And the background for this movement is called Initiative 20 by 20. It was launched at COP20 in Lima less than 4 years ago with the objective of changing the dynamics of land degradation in Latin America, and a short-term goal to initiate restoration in about 20 million hectares, which is about half the size of Paraguay. 20 million hectares is a substantial amount of land. And luckily, we've been able to do a little bit more than that. Also, in terms of context, let me drive you through a few important statistics. First, Latin America has 9% of the global population, 10% of the global emissions. So we're average. But the carbon intensity, the intensity of the carbon footprint has been falling rapidly. This is a 22% decrease in 14 years. This refers to 2014. And this is the result of changes in energy efficiency, improvements in the use of natural resources, and a reduction in the deforestation rates, a substantial reduction. Also, the power sector in Latin America is probably the cleanest worldwide as a region. There are a few countries, of course, Norway, Switzerland, Paraguay, where the 100% is renewable power. But as a region, this is the most carbon efficient power sector, 0.21 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per megawatt hour, and that's because there is a substantial renewable energy sector, basically composed of hydropower in the region. One more point important for our context is that the public transport system in Latin America is public vehicle based. There is in excess of 1.5 million buses in the largest urban areas in Latin America. That makes the carbon footprint of transport in urban settings even better than in Copenhagen or Berlin, which is amazing. So this is all to say that the power and transport sectors are relatively carbon efficient. The major problem comes from land use and use change. In terms of the total carbon signal of the region, this sector accounts for half of the total, and is a sector that includes many actors, takes place in rural areas, is difficult to tackle. But it's urgent to tackle. The annual deforestation rate in Latin America, this is 2014 figure again, 3.4 million hectares. This is 70% of the land area of Costa Rica. I should have measured one state in the United States to make the comparison, but this is a substantial amount of land. And you can imagine 70% of Costa Rica being destroyed every year, where all the animals and the fauna, the flora, the impact on soil, the impact on surface hydrology every year, that's a major tragedy. Since 2000, about 37 million hectares have been converted into agriculture, responding to global drives that have made Latin America the pivot point between supply and demand for food. So right now, Latin America is one of the largest exporters of surplus foodstuffs, fiber, to countries like China, India, even countries in Europe. To cap it off, this figure is the most troubling. There are about 300 million hectares of degraded land today. That means that we have taken soil that was productive or forest that was lush, and it has become desert or has very low productivity. And these are, we're talking about this number. These are the results of some analysis at WRI that show that the total degraded land 300 million, deforested 349, total 648 million hectares that are being underutilized or have been destroyed. They are no longer functional. To counteract that, there are techniques. The issues are not, the barriers do not have to do with technology, with practices. They have to do with other barriers. But if today we focus on avoid deforestation, that's the best way to counteract degradation. This is the cheapest way in which the countries in the region can store carbon, can maintain their carbon stocks, and can protect their natural capital. But on degraded land, you have silvopastures. You could deploy silvopastures, which is a combination of forests and cattle ranching, which with a significant better use of the natural resource, or agroforestry, which is a combination of crops and trees, low carbon agriculture, reforestation, and sustainable use of grasslands. All these practices have this thing in common. They go toward improving the functionality of soil, of land, by conserving or improving carbon stocks, by improving the quality of topsoil, maintaining surface hydrology, supporting livelihoods, better food production, and maintaining biodiversity. Well, that's easy to outline, but there are major barriers that impede or delay action on restoring land in Latin America, and a list of some, not all, but some of the most important: weak governance. And there are many examples in the region. I can give you a few where the government has enacted regulations, but they are not followed up. Lack of fiscal and financial incentives for reforestation and for restoration. And we believe this is a major obstacle: the absence of a robust carbon market in Latin America that would help provide the economic rationale, some of the economic rationale for restoration processes. In that background, within that context, Initiative 2020 was launched in 2014 at COP20, as I said, by 6 countries. And 5 impact investors that pledged about $300 million of private money to support restoration investments. But as of January of this year, there are now 17 countries. The latest to join is Dominican Republic, with a total ambition of 53 million hectares, more than twice the original goal. And now there are about 20 groups, private impact investment groups, that have pledged 7 times the original capital. $2.1 billion that have been earmarked to support investments in restoration. So I think this...
Would you like your guests to be able to unmute their own lines by pressing star 6? If yes, press 1. If no, press 2.
I think this slide, compared with my previous statement,
All guests have been muted. You will now rejoin the meeting.
illustrates that there is political will and there is capital available to restore land. Today, the initiative has 3 groups of actors: the countries, 17 countries, and we include some regional programs that are multinational in nature. Technical partners, there are about 40 technical partners that represent, in our thinking, the elite knowledge on extension services, on technical, rural knowledge, on scientific information in Latin America related to land use. And more importantly, we have now a group of about 20 financial partners. Most of them are impact investors. And I want to make sure that you understand what an impact investor is, as we are among scientists. An impact investor is a financial institution that includes an environmental and social return in their financial calculations. So is Goldman Sachs an impact investor? No. But 123 is, because 123 wants to invest its capital, wants a rate of return, financial rate of return, but a total rate of return that includes social and environmental impacts. Most of these folks are impact investors. There are a few corporations, very progressive corporations like Carana, Root Capital, but most of them are Ecoplanet Bamboo, most of them are impact investors. And the initiative has an association with the multilateral banks, the private sector window of the multilateral banks. The initiative has 3 activities. We're doing okay with time. These 3 activities, the first one is political dialogue, and the objective of that is support the development of the land restoration plan. So a country comes and say, I want to be part of 20 by 20, I want to lead and contribute with this regional restoration movement. What is your national land restoration plan? Oh, we have a sketch. So the initiative helps them organize themselves and strengthen their national restoration plans. The initiative also supports the creation of interinstitutional spaces to dialogue on land restoration policies and regulations. It happens in the United States, it happens everywhere. The Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Planning rarely meet with the Ministry of Transport on land use issues. Well, the initiative supports the creation. They lead, of course, in all these activities, support the creation of this space. We provide some limited amount of funding to bring people from local, provincial regions to promote this interinstitutional dialogue. But we also link public and private sector on land restoration issues. It's the same obstacle here. The private sector goes this way, the public sector is looking at that way, and sometimes they don't coordinate well their actions on an issue of such importance. And finally, more importantly, we support the development of an enabling environment for implementation of restoration. For instance, exchanging information with other countries. And we have a number of examples where this has happened with significant results. The second activity, so the first one is political dialogue. The second activity is an analytical effort, and I think this is where we can talk a little bit more with you guys. These are the studies that are under development. The first one has already been done, the economic case for landscape restoration in Latin America, which I'm going to circulate. And this study basically answered the question, why should the state, the nation, and why should a private investor invest in restoration? What is the argument for that? So it's a macroeconomic study. It's already published, and we can, of course, the answer to that is a resounding yes. There are a number of financial and economic reasons to support land restoration activities in Latin America, and I can send digital copy if you're interested. These studies are in progress. This is incentives, seed supply. I'll talk a little bit about that. Monitoring systems, where we would like to talk to NASA in more detail. Carbon markets for restoration, likewise, and the business of biodiversity. All these studies are the result of a demand from the countries. We would like a comparative analysis of this and this in the region. So we finance and support the effort. So the study that I'm circulating is this one. The economic argument for restoration was published in October 2016, more than a year ago. And these are the key results. Often a really good business, substantial, but often difficult to monetize co-benefits, key climate action for the region. This is the net present value analysis that was done. This is the average net present value per hectare of a composite of restoration activities. I can give you more details if you're interested, but I want to focus on this number. Carbon storage, even at a depressed value of $5 per ton of CO2 equivalent, has a significant impact on the net present value of restoration activities. And this is why it's so essential that Latin America organize its own carbon market at a regional or national basis, and some countries have gone ahead and done it to support, in a sustainable manner, restoration efforts. So I want to quickly indicate some of the other studies. This is the seed supply study. The objective is to answer the question, what is the current situation of seed and germplant supply in terms of genetic quality, availability, ease of access, identify gaps and priority needs. We're going to release it at the annual meeting in Lima in 2018. This study would like to release by mid-year. Some progress has been made. We had a meeting with all the countries in July 2017 where a lot of information was collected on what were their thinking, their ideas, their experiences with monitoring. But here what we are looking for is the development of a system that combines remote sensing with modeling and ground measurements that is simple to use, accurate, and cost-effective. So does it exist? And that's why we want to talk to you guys. An example of the relevance of that analysis and that system. This is Colombia. This is the southern part of Colombia. Colombia has 1 million square kilometers. Here we're talking about probably 350,000 square kilometers in this area. This park, Serranía de Chiviriquete, was enacted a few years back, 2012, around that. After the peace process was completed, major settlement movement of peoples, displaced peoples, and land grabbers are coming this way, and this way, and changing canopy very quickly, changing the situation with the landscapes very quick. So the government, with support of 20 by 20, is organizing a green belt that will connect the border of Brazil, this is Brazil, starting here, it's a national park, creating new areas of restored land, new national park areas, other provincial areas, new indigenous lands, to form a barrier, an effective barrier that would deter further changes in the Amazon, out of a conviction that this natural capital should remain there for future generations. So that's very laudable, and we are supporting them. This corridor will be launched during Earth Day this year. Will be probably one of the major announcements made by the government in 2018 before a change of administration. And I mentioned this is about, this area here is between 10 and 12 million hectares. I'm mentioning this example because the difference between a construct in your mind and an effective corridor will be governance and monitoring. So we are after a system that will monitor the periphery of all this effort and create the conditions for rapid reaction. If there is a fire, the fire is detected the same day, and the resources that the government has or the provincial authorities have can quickly go there. Or if someone, a wise fellow, enters here and starts to cut trees and create a passageway, then this is detected by satellite quickly. Then with the resources that are available, police can go there, helicopter, take the saws, take the cell phones, put them in prison or whatever is required. But what is really needed is a system that is accurate, that has high definition, that is inexpensive and easy to use, so we can monitor this. That's an example. There are a few others. Very quickly, this is a study on carbon markets. I'll mention that because one of the objectives is to explore the viability of using carbon measurements as a monitoring indicator. No? So we're looking after that possibility, and you might help with that as well. Well, the good news about 20 by 20 is that this large pool of risk capital is being deployed. There are now 40 projects on 10 million hectares of land. $350 million have been invested already, which is a good down payment. The bad news is that only $350 million have been deployed in over 40 projects, in only 40 projects. And we need a faster movement of that money. And in order to do that, we need to address these restrictions. There is a limited number of investable opportunities. There is a high risk perception for investments in the area, and there are problems with the regulation, incentive, and policy framework that we need to address. And that's what 20 by 20 is trying to achieve now. This is the financial architecture of 2020. I already indicated that there is a large pool of risk capital, and it's going to increase because the private sector has identified the impact private sector has identified the benefits that restoration can bring in Latin America. This is the list of the partners today. And we have, with support of Jeff and IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, put together a partial risk guarantee, very small one, we want to increase that would cover initial losses so that this capital moves quickly. We're working on a project preparation facility, supporting roundtables, have created a working capital tool to accelerate the deployment of these financial resources. This is the risk facility. is managed by the Inter-American Investment Corporation, which is part of IDB. The risk facility has a due diligence, internal due diligence, provides the risk coverage to a financial partner. Financial success, great, you paid an insurance, but at the end you achieve your results. If not, the facility covers initial losses. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because I know that you guys are not bankers. This project is with the Adaptation Fund. The intention is to bring money from the Adaptation Fund to restoration as an adaptation measure to climate change. The only reason I mention that is in the process of being approved. The concept has already been approved by the Adaptation Fund. This is very interesting. Use of high-value arboreal species as a financial asset in the Northern Andes. The idea here is that a tree normally has value when it is cut. The financial market understands lumber or understands other products resulting from cutting the tree, fiber. But the tree has an intrinsic value when it is left alone on the ground. So this is a financial structure that is being investigated with the Innovation Fund, with our support, to provide a financial collateralization value to standing trees, so that a banking institution can go to the farm or to the farmer and say, okay, you guys have half of your land covered by trees of cut, but if you don't cut them, we'll extend a collateral instrument or reduce the terms of a loan so that the farmer receives a benefit on the standing trees. This is very interesting. So we're working on that and other facilities. I want to give you a couple of examples of things that are taking place. This is a silvopasture project, takes place in Mato Grosso, around this area, 100,000 hectares total, including 100,000 hectares plus 10,000 hectares of reforestation. Artilia is investing over $100 million in risk capital. They expect a good rate of return. They have measured the creation of a continuous carbon asset, and it's moving forward. This project is moving forward, and it's an example of the things that can be done in restoration in Latin America. It's agroforestry, more agroforestry. I want to show you this one, which is recovery of natural grasslands. Grasslands have been identified in the literature as a substantial carbon sink, but also in cases is key as natural habitat for our friends the birds. So this project is relatively small in capital, but it has a very low rate of return, but is providing recovery of natural grasslands to protect migratory birds between the United States and Mexico. So that's a very interesting approach. I'm about to finish. There are a number of reasons behind the momentum. There are 40 projects, 10 million hectares under restoration. The initiative is driven by countries, not by NGOs based in Washington. They are the ones that set the agenda. They decide what to do. Private sector comes and does its part. A key driver is the potential for learning from other countries. We've seen that. One example is Chile, who experienced significant forest fires last year, during the summer of last year, caused by you know what, and they are, through our help, establishing links with the forest services of other temperate nations like New Zealand, Canada, hopefully the United States, to learn about systems that would provide with modeling of fires so that they can exercise on planning function as well as rapid responses. Private capital is flowing. We would like it to flow at a faster rate, but it's moving. And technical partners are fully engaged because they have pieces of the agenda where they act and they want to perform well. The last slide that I want to show is this one. So 20 by 20 is halfway through. It was a 20 million goal by 2020. About 10 million hectares are in a process of restoration today. Capital is flowing, could flow faster. So at the meeting in Lima, we understand that a number of ministers will launch the second stage. And the second stage is 250 million hectares by 2050. And if that can be done, luckily, this number is 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. If that can be done, if this can be done at this magnitude, this is 260 tons of carbon per hectare per year. The others are hectare year. But if all these things are done, reforestation effort at a level of 50 million hectares is completed by 2050. If 200 million hectares enter into restoration by 2050 through landscape management, if Latin America manages to avoid completely deforestation, and if other actions like management of fertilizers, management of nutrients for nitrous oxide and methane are included, this package would result in an accumulated carbon sink of about 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. This is 60% of the current carbon footprint. I don't think there is another region that has the makeup to make this possible for Latin America. Latin America could become a very low intensive carbon footprint region by 2050 through a restoration process, land restoration process. If other actions are combined with this effort, like expanding the renewable energy in the power sector or moving the transport sector to electricity, electric mobility, Latin America could become a zero carbon region by 2050. So that's what I wanted to tell you. I wanted to excite you about the prospects and entice you to identify ways in which we can work together, especially on the monitoring and sensing part, where there is a real need, not just theoretical, but triggered by facts. Projects are being developed, some of them are very large, and to be credible over the long term, we need what I refer to as an easy-to-use, accurate, and inexpensive monitoring system. And I know you guys have it. Thank you.
We have also some questions on that.
Yeah, I was wondering if, it's a great project, I was wondering if during the restoration activities, whether the biodiversity is preserved.
Should I answer right now or wait for other questions? Right now. Yes, this is a major concern of us, of the initiative at large. There are a number of partners that are in the initiative because of that issue, like Southern Wings, you know about Southern Wings, the von Humboldt Institute, American Bird Conservancy. They are all part of 20 by 20 because they worry about the birds, they worry about the fauna and flora. So the initiative is sponsoring a study whose objective is to assess the business dimensions of biodiversity conservation and recovery in restoration processes. That's one of our flagship studies. It includes these centers that I mentioned and a few others, IUCN and Conservation International as well, that are working together to develop this study, which is very much needed. No? How do we maximize protecting and gaining biodiversity while doing restoration processes? And clearly, the answer is not planting monoculture of alien species.
So we have questions here. We have a couple of questions online. Naira Pinto, she asks, how do you currently measure the benefits of carbon corridors?
You might need to repeat that question because you didn't say it.
Yeah, or I can say it here.
You have one there?
Yeah. So Naira Pinto, she asks, how do you currently measure the benefits of carbon corridors?
Carbon corridors. Well, I don't fully understand the question because we refer to green corridors. Green corridors have the potential to maintain carbon stocks and to increase their carbon stocks, but there are other benefits associated to it. Through a restoration and conservation effort, the benefits are conservation of surface hydrology, conservation of soil productivity, probably increases in agricultural yields if it is landscape management, protection of local weather and climate, and of course there is a climate benefit, a global climate benefit. I hope I've answered the question.
We'll see if there's some follow-up.
Yeah, very interesting. I noticed Venezuela and Bolivia are the sort of outliers. I wonder what political issue there is there. I was just wondering how you decide, what places to actually go and restore, because obviously you would probably want to find out what was there before, land use history,
Right.
and not try to restore places that are. And sort of related to that is then how do you assess the what impact you're having? So in other words, is it working in certain areas, or is it? Do you have it's local partners that do that, or I don't know if you see what I mean.
Yeah, very good question.
Deciding where you
Right.
do your work.
Very good question. So the answer comes in pieces. The main piece is that we are working in the context of a national restoration plan. And that plan hopefully has restoration priority areas or areas that are under threat of degradation. So that's the main part. So the government has a strategy and they say, well, in this country, what we need is investments in landscape management in dry savanna. The second part is the business community. So the impact investors who want to work in that country enter into a dialogue on what can be done and what can be done with a rate of return, because none of these folks want to invest money without a return. Clearly, they don't want 35% per year, but they want a return. And many of them, most of them, have a safeguard policy that say, basically, our shareholders of the Impact Investment Fund would like you to only work in areas where you generate so many jobs per $1 million invested, or where women are 50% of the labor. So that's the second part. I think the most important here is the convening of the public desire or the public framework. This is what we would like to do. This is where we would like to work. This is what we would like to do with the private capital, which says, I'm willing to do this, but not that. And that's the subject of the investment roundtables. We've done 4 investment roundtables so far, which have been quite successful. We're planning a few others. In Brazil, we'll have an investment roundtable in May, and thereafter in Nicaragua. Now, the second question is, how do you make sure that what was proposed and what was envisioned is actually taking place? Are you generating the jobs? Is soil being conserved? Is the canopy increasing? So there are 3 levels there. One, the private impact investors themselves have safeguard policies, which I mentioned, and they also have to respond to the shareholders on the results of the investment. This is why we're not working with commercial banks. We're working with impact investors. Second, we're trying to organize an effective monitoring system, helping organize an effective monitoring system in each country. Each country will do a different monitoring system because it will be very difficult for all of them to agree. But we are trying to promote a common denominator. It's not yet in place, but that's why we're talking to you. We'd like your help to visualize how this could be mounted. In our view, it has three elements, I just said. Remote sensing, which is your business, modeling, which may be your business, I think it is as well, and ground stations. Many of these folks that are investing money, as well as the local authorities, are allocating some money. We'll have to see if that is enough to create cabins or engaging the local community to ensure that what they are saying is actually taking place. But I don't think that's enough. I think we need an independent system that will provide data that is sufficient to pass judgment that canopy has increased, for instance. No?
I'm gonna do one or two questions here, and then we can go here. So, George Hurt, he's the lead for this program, and he also is the principal investigator in some of the carbon projects that we have. He regrets not being here, but he's online, and he's gonna reach out to you.
Great.
But he asks, how and how well do you estimate the rate of future carbon storage resulting from restoration?
Great question. Great question, because I have a slide on that.
Let me know if...
Okay, so it depends on the system. This is, I don't know if you can see here, but the table is not very good. But these are some studies that have measured the recovery of carbon sink in managed, previously logged forests. And this is in tons of carbon per hectare. So we have some numbers in the literature, and we can base estimates based on those numbers. Agroforestry systems have also been reported in the literature. This is tons of carbon per hectare year. Different systems, for instance, multi-strata agroforestry, cacao in Costa Rica, reported by Lawrence and Lal at that level of tons of carbon per hectare accumulated per year. Silvopastures, similar. There is a similar, it's not there. Emission of methane from agriculture. We know that there are systems, commercial systems, that could reduce emissions of methane. Same with nitrous oxide emissions in agriculture, reported in the literature. So there are a number of, there is substantial literature on this issue, at least in our judgment. Of course, more data would be even better, but we have based the estimates in this table on literature numbers reported for tropical and temperate areas.
Okay. Alex Hernandez, he says, thank you very much for the presentation. In Honduras, after the bark beetle attacks of the recent years, land use changes seems inevitable. Is there any specific initiative in 20 by 20 for Honduras? And also, do you see agroforestry as being the new permanent land use or gradual transition back to forest?
In Honduras?
Yes.
Yeah, Honduras is part of the cohort of countries under 20 by 20. We have in Honduras a monitoring, the establishment of the baseline for future monitoring. That's what we are doing in Honduras. We're establishing a baseline. We're trying to measure what's happening today. And of course, what's happening today is evolving as we identify the amount of land in forests, still in forests. There is a very rapid deforestation rate. Your colleague implies something that is quite accurate, that given the political and socio-economic situation of Honduras, the baseline in the near future may be agroforestry instead of pristine forests, at least for significant fraction of the total land. I have to be diplomatic here, but there are some countries that are more difficult to work with others, and some of these countries don't have the institutional capacity or the same level of commitment. I'm not saying Honduras is, but I'm mentioning this as a fact. And that's why in Honduras we are focusing on documenting the situation today, because we see significant change. And a few years from now, the change may be negative, but we would like to revert that curve, hopefully, in the near future.
Sure. One more question here, and I'll go to Sushal. Marcela Holguin, she says, many thanks for the presentation. What type of modeling tools are you considering for the integration of ground data and remote sensing data?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's why I'm here. We want your guidance, we want your help. I think I wanted to convey that 20 by 20 is not theoretical. Things are happening. It's a good experiment for you to get involved, to help us with the monitoring effort, including all those three elements. We mentioned modeling because we understand that in many cases you cannot measure and quantify everything on every single square kilometer, and some modeling will be required. That's our assumption. But hopefully, through a discussion with you guys, we'll clarify those thoughts.
Thank you. I can see, of course, huge benefits in many areas in the restoration and reforestation and biodiversity and conservation, etc. What I'm curious about is, what does a random private sector entity, how do they see a cash flow return on it to invest in it? Because they'll be looking at cash flow, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to how that is incentivized or whatever the right.
Right. Have you received the report? The report was circulated somewhere there. Yeah. Okay, that report, I think, at least partially answers your question, because the report looks into different streams of revenues in a composite, a theoretical composite of landscape management and reforestation, and has a number of cases. In the vast majority of them, through these streams of revenues that I'll show you again, the results are positive. And this is what these random organizations detect. They detect that investments in agroforestry produce a substantial stream of revenues in agricultural production while conserving some canopy. Others see income from ecotourism, like Permian Global. I don't know if you've heard about Permian Global. It's an impact investor based in England, and the CEO is an avid bird watcher. And no surprise to us that he wants to include in their business model high quality, high level value bird watching in their products. But there are other non-wood forest products. There is a company called Eco Enterprises that focuses on non-destructive forest products, flowers, fruits, other products, orchids, wood forest products, of course, in some cases, sustainable management of diverse forests can be achieved, and carbon stocks. Now, carbon stocks is dicey here, but there are 3 countries that have created a carbon market already in Latin America. Colombia, which has a carbon tax of $5 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, and that money, which produces about 700, it produces a certain amount of money, I don't remember now, finds its way, we hope, will find its way into restoration investments, because restoration is a cost-effective mitigation measure. So if the fellow who is paying for this tax, he has to mitigate his carbon emissions, compares an activity in industry or an activity in power generation with planting trees, will quickly realize that planting trees can be the cheapest. So in Colombia, we expect to see some of the flow of the carbon tax going into land restoration. Chile has also carbon tax. Hopefully will survive the new administration, we think so. And Mexico has also created a limited carbon tax, so carbon market. But it's still dicey. We think that if a regional carbon market is created, that would give a tremendous financial drive to restoration processes in Latin America. We hope it happens. But you're welcome to read the document, and I can send you a digital copy.
There was one more question that we had online, and it was just a clarification for agroforestry. So the question was, is agroforestry planting trees on farmland, or is it growing crops in forests?
Very good question. Precise definition of agroforestry would include everything, but an ideal agroforestry system for us is a landscape management tool that includes crops combined with sun canopy. A typical example is shade coffee. As you know, shade coffee there was a drive to abandon shade coffee in pursuit of regular no canopy coffee. With climate change, that is being abandoned. And now there are even more reasons to go back to shade coffee. Cacao, can also be grown under canopy. Now, it's also a tree that has a symbiosis with natural forests. So cacao plantings can be interspersed in a degraded forest, sustain their future growth and carbon storage, and at the same time provide a quick income to the farmers. And in fact, very quickly, we have a very interesting project here by Karana Corporation.
Guests to be able to unmute their own lines by pressing star 6. If yes, press 1. If no, press 2.
So this is a project by Karana Corporation in Peru, and it has 28,000 hectares. They are investing $58 million in risk capital. Their aim is to create 8,000 jobs, and they project that farmer income will go up to $4,000 per hectare by combining cacao plantations in degraded forests.
Do we have any other questions here?
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. Let me see. I've got two questions. One, it's a technical question. With you saying that you would like to have early detection systems, at high resolution. So there's two problems there. One is the freely available data is typically 10 to 30 meters at the highest resolution. Commercial data goes less than half a meter at some cost. So the question is, what sizes of the disturbances are you looking at when somebody goes into the forest? If they're just cutting one or two trees down, do you need to detect that, or are you looking at, they're removing an entire hectare at a time?
And the second question,
The second. Oh, sorry. The second question had to do with high value of arboreal species. It turns out that there's a number of programs here in the United States, one of which is it focuses not only on the trees themselves, but to support native pollinators and various other things. And the government gives farmers, either a small stipend for basically making an easement or break on the taxes or other things. And so I was curious about some of the details, if it's appropriate to speak here, on how you envision, support of not only the trees, but also, the native herbaceous cover that supports native pollinators, etc. So
very good questions, and we might need to follow up. But on the level of detection, it really would be a result of a discussion with you. We were thinking 25 square meters of alteration, and we were thinking about immediate detection of fires, either by a change of brightness, satellite size brightness, or detection of temperature, because fires require immediate response. On the change of canopy, we understand that there are limits to this, but as accurate as possible, because once someone comes into these areas, other folks immediately follow. On the arboreal species, we'll have a meeting on Friday with the Innovation Fund and Bank CO2. I can tell you the basic idea is there a list of trees in the red list in the Northern Andes has been prepared. So there are trees that have 500 individuals left. Now it's critical. And all trees that the population is decreasing. It's not still in the red list, but the population is decreasing. Many of those trees, if the population is recovered, could provide an income by cutting the trees, because normally they are valuable tropical hardwood, but we're not there yet. And we want an incentive to be provided to maintaining the trees for one generation at least, maybe more. So the discussion has centered around two approaches. One, create a pension fund, that these trees represent a pension fund for the kids of the farmer. So the pension fund, or when the farmer retires. So that provides a contextual perspective that is very much required, because trees mature in 20 years or 25 years. So that's one of the concepts that is being explored. How do we create a pension fund that is based on the collateral financial value of these trees in the next generation? And the second is Bank CO2, which is the bank that we are discussing with, provides loans to farmers. So can these trees be a financial asset that replaces a mortgage, or replaces an asset that is pledged against a loan, or at least reduces the term sheet of the loan? Normally, this is an example, theoretical example. Normally the bank will say, I will lend you at X% with 3 years of grace. If the farmer has these trees, can that X% be minus delta? And can the grace period be plus Z years? So those are the two concepts. I'm very enthusiastic about this, because it's bringing a financial value to natural capital. I would like to learn more about experiences in the United States. I declare myself ignorant, and you mentioned a few things that I would love to learn more about, if we can follow up. Good, and this is my card.
So this is just 1 p.m., so it's perfect that we can finish with this, and then anyone that is interested, we have this room until 2 p.m., so feel free to stay here and talk to Walter. We are going to continue with the NASA Applied Sciences to talk with WRI and Walter on the assessment that they are doing on monitoring, different monitoring alternatives for landscape restoration in Latin America. We have a couple of people online that want to follow up with you, so I'll let you know.
Great.
So thank you everyone, and thank you everyone for online.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.